Welcome to another episode of the Shift Podcast. This is not just a podcast, it is a powerhouse of taking ownership of your performance, growth, and leadership education. It's an opportunity to shift yourself in the direction of your potential and impact those around you. This podcast is your gateway to a world of behavior change-based insights, psychology research, and knowledge from guest speakers gathering years of experience in the corporate world as well as entrepreneurship. With years of coaching and mentoring professionals, my mission is simple: to make every moment you spend with me and my guests actionable and empowering. In this episode, I talk with Alka Bromiley, and we really discuss the ups and downs of challenges that she has experienced in her life and how she had to recreate and kind of reframe her mindset with everything that come in her way, whether it was cultural differences between who she was, where she was growing up, and expectations from society, whether it was the physical and verbal and emotional abuse that she suffered through her relationships, or just managing grief as tragedy struck her family, not once, but twice. I think it's inspiring to hear her story, and I hope you find it the same. Let me know what you think. Alka, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Elena. It's very exciting to be on somebody else's podcast. I'm super excited.
I know. I always love it when I put podcasters in the seat of the interviewee, so it's not really an interview, but it's like a chat. But it's always like you're in the hot seat now. And it's always like a different experience. You're like, whoa, like I get to talk now and stuff. So it's very exciting to have you here.
It's nerve-wracking because you're putting yourself into your guest's shoes thinking, what are they going to be feeling? And my heart's beating a little bit, but it's only because I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast, as you know, is around shifts in life. And really just my aim is, how can we continue to learn from one another about, building that resilience and mindset? And I think you're just a perfect guest for this because you have gone through so many shifts yourself in your life. And you have, from personal life to professional life and all the different experiences that you've had. So give us a little snapshot around kind of the diverse life that you've had so far.
That's a really interesting place to start because I was born in Kenya. I was born in Mombasa in Kenya, was brought to England by my parents with my two older sisters at the time. I now have another sister, but we came to England and I was only 5 months old. So that was a big shift that obviously I didn't feel at the age of 5 months, but I was brought into what I call a Western world, England, from Kenya, with the Indian culture. And that was a big shift for me as I grew, because I was having challenges of the Eastern world and the Western world. And I talk about this a lot because the older I get, I realize how much it really did affect me, some ways in for the better, and other ways I found it quite challenging. And when I came to England, I still had my religion and culture back at home, and I was taken to the temple to enjoy at the time the Indian religion, and other ways I was in a Western school wanting to be with the Western girls and have dolls and go to the disco and stuff like that, which I really wasn't allowed to do. So that was a really big moment in my life growing up as a young girl, until I got to my teens and I decided that my big shift was to rebel against all that and really become myself. So I found that really, really challenging. That was probably one of the, I don't know how you feel about those changes, but that was a really big moment in my life to start being Alka and start finding out who I really was and who I really wanted to be. That was a really big shift.
What's interesting is you said you've kind of found that in your teen years, and I'm so envious because I didn't really shift into my true self until like 30s. like I think once I hit 30, I was like, okay, I think I want to change something. And then for me, that's when like everything started to your point, like combining. I'm also like from the East, and it's like the East and the West and being Americanized, but coming from this Eastern culture. So it's difficult. It's amazing that you knew that at such an earlier age.
Yeah, and please don't get me wrong, because from the age of 13 onwards, my brother died. I had a little brother who died when I was 13, and that really affected me. But then I had a little sister who's, wonderful. I look at it as the silver lining, the cloud with the silver lining. We have to look at the positives in life, and losing my brother was a real big blow to the family, but having my sister is so much joy. But from the age of 13, when that happened, I really did realize that I was struggling so much. And as I got to the age of 17, I left home, which was a big thing in our culture as a girl, as a young woman. And from the age of 17, 18, right up until my mid-30s, I was bumbling along in life, going through some really bad times, bad relationships, struggling to really find out what life is all about. I mean, who knows at that age? Every single day is different, and you feel like you're guiding yourself in the right directions, but sometimes the big thing for me at the moment is surround yourself with the right people and good people. And sometimes I felt like I was really, really lost. And sometimes I feel like that now. We learn and grow from what we see, experience, read, do, the people we encounter, and we learn from them. And sometimes I felt that I was really not going down the right roads with the right people on my side.
Do you remember like what exactly was it that kind of sparked for you to say, okay, like you mentioned, like as you know, like towards your early or mid-30s, do you remember anything that like sparked you to make a change? Because you mentioned environment, I think it's so important. I very much relate, and I remember there's specific shifts that happen, and for me it was I had to completely start fresh and be alone to almost like reset my environment and like move and all of that. So because I feel like it's hard for people to do. So I'm curious, like, what was it for you? Like, what was there like a specific thing that happened or mindset shift?
Yeah, and I know that a lot of your podcast, Lena, is about careers, and I will move on to that in a moment. But my personal life was so intense for me. And it was 1997 when my dad died. So grief is a very, very prominent emotion, I guess, prominent thing in my life that kind of maneuvered me in my thoughts and my actions, really. And my dad died when I was just turned 26. And that was a huge shift, where those years after that, I realized that why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I with the people that I'm with the person that I'm with as a relationship, surrounded by the so-called friends, and doing the things that I'm doing in my professional life? I'm really not happy. And why am I battling with myself, really? And I think that was a pivotal moment for me when my father passed away, that I realized that I was really not appreciating life as much as I should be.
And you know what's interesting, although like you know, I'm really interested in that mindset that you have, because even though you mentioned careers, but in career you see that people have gone through some kind of challenges, that have that resilience in their core and their character, are usually much more resilient in their career. Because it's like I always say, like, it's not like you walk into your office or your virtual office and all of a sudden you're this you know the mindset is different and you're this resilient person. You are who you are outside and inside work. And I think the external experience outside of work experiences what shape us. And for you, it sounds like you've had a lot of those experiences early in age, which really probably gave you that tough skin. And I'm sure it impacts everything else that you do, because it's, you know, it's resilience. I mean, it's not like you turn it on and off when you start work and stop work.
It's a really interesting conversation, because now in my 50s, I'm 52, and I'm not ashamed to say I'm 52, because I feel like I'm getting to that stage in my life where I'm trying to be the best of me. And sometimes people may say, oh, how big-headed, the best of you. But if we don't see ourselves as performing as the best of us, behaving as the best of us, then we're not going to succeed. We're going to struggle in life. And in my younger years, my biggest issue was lacking self-confidence. And I never thought I was good enough. I never thought I was good enough in education. I was mediocre, C grades. I did a diploma, and then I did a degree in hospitality, which wasn't the mainstream doctor, lawyer, accountant, things that maybe in my culture, my parents wanted me to be, and my relatives traditionally would have expected me to be. And I felt that battling with that led me, not completely, I don't blame it all on that, to become kind of lacking self-confidence. And it spread throughout me. So I didn't think I was attractive enough. Who would marry me, I thought. So at 36, I decided to get married to somebody who was not the right person to get married to. I chose careers that I could have done better, but I didn't think I could. I loved being in hotels. My biggest strength is personality, communication, customer service. It's impeccable for me. And so those I know are my core strengths now that I didn't really appreciate then, because I always thought I wasn't good enough. And it seeped through into all different parts, all different areas of my life, personally and professionally. And I don't know whether that makes sense, but looking in as an adult to my younger self, that's what I see. And I see it in a lot of people, a lot of younger people. And I would like to provide that as a story of some kind of guidance to say, you got to look inside yourself and look at the fact that you have a lot of capabilities, and maybe you're listening to the wrong people, maybe you're reading the wrong things, watching the wrong things, talking to the wrong people who don't bring out that best in you, and ultimately you won't bring out the best in yourself.
You know, I think that's so powerful, because I again, I completely relate, and I think a lot of people can relate, because it's almost like, you know, there's different stories we tell ourselves based on whatever experience we had when we were kids. Similar to you, for me, I mean, I feel the same way. Like, I've spent, people that listen to me know, like, I've spent like majority of my life right now, so far at least, just completely doubtful, not knowing where to go. And so it's only when I start doing these self-awareness. So for people who are listening, like, you know, that self-awareness piece is so important, that self-reflection, and it's continuous. And I think the downfall is, part of it is like the education system is just not something we're encouraged to think about. Part of it is culture, families. Like in my culture is very similar, like the Eastern cultures in general, they're very like, it's a very straight up line that you have to walk. And if you don't go that way, it's like you don't belong, you're not good enough, and nothing else counts unless you just follow that straight line of whatever culture expects you, you know, of what success might look like in that culture. And I think that we don't think about it, you know, how much it impacts kids, you know, because we do have to live in these multicultural worlds and these global societies. So unless we just stay in the same small town, it does have a huge impact. And so yeah, I think it's, again, I think it's very interesting how we just don't spend enough time, you know, talking about it with children. And you know, in our 20s, we just think we know everything, so we don't listen to anybody anyway.
It's so true. And sometimes I know that I have to check myself, because I feel like maybe I didn't get more of the human kind of touch from my parents, where, you know, it was the lovey-doveyness, and that's not the case. You know, my parents were really supportive. They loved us so much, and they only wanted the best for us. And as my sister reminded me a few months ago, Mum and Dad were doing the best they could at the time. They brought us into a society because they wanted to have the best for us. They knew that it would be good for our futures, and they worked really hard, Elena. I mean, if you want to talk about careers, my dad was knocking on doors in England in the 70s when racism was rife, trying to get a job as a bookkeeper, an accountant, anything. And fortunately, one particular person saw some goodness in him and took him under his wing, and he became a CPA accountant and worked his way up. And my mother worked in a factory. She had to take 3 buses to go and do that job because she had to. So sometimes we have to do what we have to do. And sometimes as children, back then and even now, we don't think that our parents are doing things for our best, but actually they are. And I do look back and think, well, kudos to them. They are my role models now, because they did everything they could to give us what we have now. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's what's also interesting is that I think a lot of people are kind of like not blaming their parents, but it's like an excuse. Well, I didn't have that growing up, or they didn't do X, Y, and Z. But really, like you said, like they did the best that they could with the information they had, with what they knew. And I think just as an adult, or even just like as a young adult, as you're growing up, just realizing that your parents are just people, and they're just humans, and they're just they didn't have a handbook, they didn't know what they were doing. So I think just recognizing that will improve a lot of relationship with parents worldwide, because a lot of times we blame our parents for X, Y, and Z, and then it's like, oh no, like they just did the best that they could, but now that I know better and I know things a little bit different, now I can change that. But I think we blame a lot on like, that's how I grew up, or X, Y, and Z, without taking accountability for, now that I know this, I don't have to hold on to that. I can actually change X, Y, and Z about myself. You know, so it's yeah, I mean kudos to any parents. I'm not a parent yet, but I can't even imagine. I mean, it's just, you know, I'm a step parent, I guess, and I can't even imagine. You know, the kids are just a handful, and it's just so difficult. You know, it's like, I don't think anybody really knows what they're doing. Every parent, I think, is just trying to figure it out.
Right. And I'm a step parent too, and my stepchildren are older, so that they're adults. But you know, looking at my nieces and nephews, often I really admire my young sister who has 3 little ones. I admire all my sisters, but I guess one of the ways we have to look at it is always to see the joy that those children bring. And I think when we see the joy of anything within our lives, we always strive that one bit harder to make whatever challenge it is possible. And we can look at that with careers as well. How many times have we heard, if you love something and it's your passion, it's not your job, you're going to enjoy it and it's going to be so much easier. It's the same with children. And I look at my sister and I see the love that she has for my nieces and nephews, and wow, I have that love, but she has that motherly love. And I totally can understand how important raising those children in a happy, healthy, safe environment is, and the joy that they bring to you. Yeah.
And speaking of your nieces, you actually started a podcast with your niece, and now you're kind of taking a reign on your own with it as well. But talk to me a little bit more what sparked your podcast.
Yeah, my niece Krisha K. Gandhi, I'll give her a plug, and I started changing platforms on September of 2021. She was actually in Kyrgyzstan teaching, and I was here in the States. And I've been wanting to start a podcast for a long time, but with anything, often you talk about it, you say you want to do it, then you procrastinate, other things come along, and you don't do it. And Krisha and I were in a situation where she came out as openly gay, and by that I mean she'd known for a while, but she told my mother, her grandmother, and that was a big thing. And my mum obviously embraced her and had no judgments about the factor, except she loved her, and as long as she was happy. And once that happened, Krisha was openly gay, wanting to talk about it, wanted to help other people, maybe within different cultures who were struggling. And she was in Kyrgyzstan, and she was going to move out of Kyrgyzstan back to the UK. And I have been through various situations. We talked about some of them previously, but I've been through a lot of domestic violence situations. And I say a lot, you know, people wonder, oh, well, didn't you learn from one? Well, it's not that easy. You come out of one place and you know you've been brainwashed with one relationship, and you walk into another. And the physical violence was really a turning point. I know you said we talked about shifts, and after my dad died, I very quickly realized that I needed to get out of that particular relationship, and I did, thankfully, and I'm here and I'm alive to tell the story. But I also experienced not just physical, but verbal, emotional, physical abuse, and I felt that it was time to really talk about it, because I knew that there were other people out there who were struggling like I was, to make that change and to stop blaming themselves. And so we started changing platforms together. We didn't just want it to be a platform where we talked about stress and trauma and upset, but we wanted to talk about change, and we wanted to bring that positivity in. And our mission became something that was focused on inclusion, equality, and diversity, which is big to us. And so we started that. Krisha was on the podcast as my co-host until the end of season 4, and she just turned 30. I would just turned 51, and I think it was a time where she had other things. I mean, at 30, there's so much that you want to do with your life. And she's a career woman. She's head of a primary school. She's in a lovely relationship. She's moved to a new place. She's doing so many wonderful things. And I wanted changing platforms to go to a different platform. I wanted it to elevate it into a more not more business, but I wanted to put more time, and I had more time to put into it. And so here I am, coming up to 100 episodes. I did season 5, coming up to the end of season 6 soon, and moving on to season 7 at the end of the year. And the stories that we have, it's a guest like your podcast. We invite guests on, and people who've experienced things in their life and have made a change and made that shift, but focus on lessons learned. And we have music on our platform too, which it's interesting. I love music. Music's very, very important. It's a healing tool for me as well. And so we both decided that music is important. So we decided to use Spotify in order to do that safely and legally with the music licenses. And that's changing platforms, and I love it. I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah, no, I love podcasts. I mean, obviously I have one, and I think it's such a tool to share stories. And I was recently just telling someone, said, I don't know how often can you just message a stranger and be like, hey, like, you want to talk? Your profile looks interesting. Like, how often? But people are usually willing to be like, yeah, let's hop on a pod, let's record some content together and have a chat. And it's, it has led me, to so many different, new networks and relationships and just, knowledge and self-awareness and empathy, and you name it, there's just numerous benefits. So, yes, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but every single one is unique, and every single one has a story, and every guest has a story. And and yours sounds like it's very, very interesting, and it's those personal stories that matter. Those are important. And I think that more and more in the corporate world, if we could just be a little bit more personal versus like robotic, and everything is like structure and business and money and all of that, which is all very, very important. But I think that if we're just able to see people as themselves and as people versus just numbers, I think it could make us all a little bit more human, so to say, in the corporate world.
I totally am with you there. And you and I wouldn't have met if we didn't have podcasts. And it's a different form of communication. A lot of people like to read, get their information and education from the television. And a podcast is just, I believe, a different form that other people may prefer of audio and visual communication. And the beauty of podcasting for me is we've got listeners in over 55 different countries now. And to me, that's a win in 2 years. It's phenomenal that you may be going through something that somebody else may be going through at the other end of the world. And as I used to say, and I still say with my podcast, if one person listens and gets a positive thing out of it to make a change in their life, it's a win.
I'm curious, if we shift back to the mindset, what are some, I guess, if somebody's like in a hard situation right now, like what has helped you? Because I'm sure like it all came with experience. Like, it's not like the first time something happened or challenge arose and you're like, oh, I'm just going to follow this formula. I'm sure there's like kind of things that you've done that helped you overcome each challenge that you dealt with. Is there anything specific that you think might be helpful to the audience? Like any tips of how do you manage all that change mentally, especially?
It's very, very difficult. And the first thing I would say is you're not alone. I read something this morning and I wish I'd written it down because I didn't believe in it. And it said, don't share your fears, share the change that you can make, or something along that lines. And I disagreed, because if we don't share our fears, then they're wallowing inside us and we sit back and we start stressing and worrying about it. A big thing for me to overcome some of those challenges and make the changes was opening up. I went through a stage of real loneliness, and that's one of my big phobias. And I admit it, that I hate being alone. Whether I'm sat in my office or if I'm lying in bed alone, it's horrible. And I just kind of feel as if we open up to people and we share our concerns, our fears, our aspirations, our goals, our dreams, we can do it together and we can create a support structure. And that was so important to me, to be able to pick the phone up and say to my sister, hey, I've got a problem. Or my best friend who may be on the other side of the world, and say, I need you, I need your help. And it's so true. If one of your friends goes quiet and you don't hear from them for a while, it's not because you've done something wrong. And I think that so many times, well, what did I say? What did I do? It's because they may be struggling, and just reach out to them and, hey, how you doing? And you'll be surprised that you may just be the person they needed to hear from that day. So that was a really big thing that helped me. And I went through a long period of my life where I isolated myself, and it hurt. It really hurt. That was a big.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Yeah, it's you know, oftentimes when people disappear, we're always like try to take it personal, like make it about us, like what did I do to that person? But it's like it's probably not about you. So maybe reach out anyway. Yeah, we need to let go of some of our egos and self-driven kind of thoughts and say maybe it's something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
And
with you.
ego is a big thing. I know you may ask me about the question of what I could advise other people, or the change that other people might be able to make. And one of the things that I would say is that ego is a big thing, and we all have it in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes it might be able to be used as a tool, but I feel that it's very, very rare. I think one of the things that we should ask ourselves every day is, what's in it for the other person? You know, what have we done today that has helped somebody? And competition is a huge thing that happens globally. It's happening, or there's wars in this world because of egos and competition. It gets really ruthless, and often competing can be a great thing. However, sometimes it can be used as malice, destruction. And I think we really need to look at ourselves as good human beings and ask ourselves every morning, what can I do today that will help somebody and make the world a better place? And it's difficult. There's 7 billion people in this world, and we're going through a lot of negativity, death, destruction. But every little thing that we could possibly do may help in some way. And ego is something that maybe we need to look at within ourselves, and maybe ask ourselves a question of, yes, is it good to do that? And why is it good to do that? And no, that's not so great to do that. And this is why. And it could be that it may cause more malice than it would cause good. And that's what I'm trying to go by.
Yeah, I love that. Before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where do you hang out?
I hang out on all the social media channels. I have a website called changingplatforms.org. O-R-G. No, let me say that again. You have to edit that. It's changingplatforms.com, C-O-M, changingplatforms.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Threads. I mean, all those places. You'll find my email addresses on there too. I have a coaching and consulting business called Inspire2. That's Inspire with the number 2. And you can find that on the Changing Platforms website as well. And there's a page on Inspire2 also. And I focus on positivity, happiness, change. I actually made a career shift into laughter coaching, and you're smiling, which I like.
Yeah, I saw that.
When you say the word laughter, often people fear it. They go, oh, it's going to make me laugh. But I focus on the serious side of laughter and how it can help you to make a positive change in your life. And you can read about all of that on my website, changingplatforms.com.
Nice. And I'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes as well for those who are listening and maybe driving and say, oh, I didn't write it down. And the last question I have for you is, what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
If I was going to answer that question, I mentioned the egos, but I think I would like to add that often we stop ourselves from doing something because, as I said, we don't believe that we can do it. So if you have an opportunity, whatever it may be in your professional or personal life, and you instantly think of saying no, ask yourself, what about if you said yes? Could you really do it? Maybe sit back and list why you said no, and maybe you can come up with 2, 3, 4, 10 answers. But if you sit down and really make a list of why you should do it, I bet you'd come out with more. And it may give you the momentum to make that change and take that leap and jump and do it. And that's what I would ask you is, ask yourself why, you're saying yes or no, and then ask yourself the alternative. And if you're saying no, I bet you will come out with a yes, and you may just make that change.
Amazing. Well, Alka, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to watching your podcast and hopefully having another chat again in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was great.